And I'm very glad that Dan's picking up the research seminars, so those will keep on. But so that's just I think that covers the research for this time.
Okay, great, thank you. And of course, if anyone has anything else that they would like to bring up, that will be fine as well. So I'd like to start out. Naomi, thanks for being on the call. I know that both Naomi and Kelly will be in the office in a few days, but thanks for joining us via Zoom. So Naomi, could you just give us a brief introduction of yourself, what you'll be doing for Future Generations, and what your expertise and your background is?
Sure. I guess I should start with, I'm from West Virginia in the Franklin area. I went to Franklin High School and grew up in that area. So I'm familiar with the sort of Appalachian component. I got my degrees in civil and environmental engineering and focused, my dissertation work focused on Appalachian flood hydrology. So I worked a lot in Tucker County and in Pendleton County for my dissertation work. And then I worked at the USDA Agricultural Research lab in Coshocton, Ohio for a postdoc, and then I've worked in private industry for a while. A couple years ago, I joined the Delaware Geological Survey, and I've worked a lot with terrain data and with watershed analysis, environmental concerns, things like that. So my background is not in the social sciences, it's more in the environmental and hydrologic sciences. But I do have a strong interest in the more human aspects of things, I think both from growing up there in West Virginia, and also I think as I went back to work full time, understanding that what was really drawing me into specific areas was the people. So I'm excited to shift my research a little bit more toward the human element and bring my scientific background to Future Generations. So I'll be involved in the Biomeridian project and also potentially this Region 8 project if we get that funding. I will be helping students integrate spatial data into their work, and who knows what else will develop. I'm sure things that I don't even know about yet.
Exactly, that always happens. And also specifically, we're looking forward to having Naomi working with our mapping class that we'll be offering during term 2. So
yeah, most of my work is in GIS and spatial analysis at this point. So yeah, I'm excited to help you guys utilize GIS more.
Yeah, thanks, and we're excited to have your expertise with us. Have you with us?
Thanks.
Thanks, Naomi. Kelly, could you introduce yourself also, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Fleming. I come up to the North Mountain campus on a regular basis, but I'm currently in Blacksburg, Virginia. I spent the first couple years of my life in the Indian subcontinent. So I was in Nepal for a while, Bangladesh for a while, India for a while. I was growing up. So I'm familiar with all that part of the region of the world. Most recently, I was living in Wellington, New Zealand, and I was supporting a similar academic program to what Future Generations runs, in that it's completely online and international. And so my role there, and a similar role that I'm hoping to have here, is to kind of help faculty who are experts in their own fields, but probably are working on their expertise as far as teaching in the online environment and supporting students in the online environment. So I'm doing a little bit of project management with integrating Moodle and Mahara. I'm doing hopefully be doing some faculty development about pedagogy when it comes to online learning. I've been looking at some of the data that Jesse collected from the surveys over the last 4 terms, pulling out all the things that have to do with sort of the confluence of IT and learning and teaching and what we can do to sort of help, because that's a space that I'm very familiar with and I enjoy helping other people get more comfortable with. So I've had a lot of discussions with Christy and Luke about the first term and how we're going forward with the new Moodle pages. I'd be happy to talk to anyone else or give people access to getting onto learn.future.edu and kind of playing with our teaching space. I've had some discussion with Ruben about going forward and Dan about the projects, the e-portfolios, which was a big push at the end of 2017, and how we're using those going forward. Sorry, I'm totally rambling. All right, great. I'm happy to see you guys on Thursday, Friday, and yeah, great.
Thank you, Kelly. And yeah, as Kelly mentioned, it's been very helpful already to be working with her as we are getting our courses, our next term courses onto Moodle. So that's been already a big help, and I know it will continue to be. So with that, I would like to talk briefly. As you know, we finished class 2017. We had our graduation on October 28th, and Jody has been very helpful on keeping the records and statistics for that. I just like to mention a couple of good stats. We have 16 out of the 27 matriculated students have graduated, and that gives us a graduation rate of 59%, which at this point is about the best we've had so far at the almost on-time graduation rate. So I think it's a really good accomplishment for us. Our overall, just to remind you, our overall graduation rate of all the classes is 68%. We have a total of 103 graduates from 32 countries, and thanks again to Jody for tracking all of that. And I'd like to give credit to our RADs, to Luke and Nawang and Freo, and also to who really have helped students along the way and been very good mentors and advisors to them, and also to Dan Robinson, who really, to use an important phrase, I guess, took the bull by the horns with Mahara and took it upon himself in term four to ensure that students knew how to get their material onto Mahara, which was one of our graduation requirements, but something that kind of fell through the cracks in class 2017 we were doing so many new things. It took weekly sessions to be able to get them comfortable with the platform and to get their practicum collection there, and also their artifacts in their courses. And so it was a really good team effort to get most of our students through, and Jody said that a few more are about ready to graduate, so we expect that number and that percentage will also go up. Also to the finance office, we changed with class 2017, we changed our system for collecting tuition, and so we didn't let students move forward from term to term if they hadn't paid their tuition bill. And so we didn't end up with any students who didn't graduate because they hadn't paid tuition. And so that was a huge help also in getting students to graduate on time. So our finance office really also came up with a good strategy, and that strategy will continue into our next class, into the class 2019. So despite the successful finish, we've, through our gathering of evidence and through our just carefully looking at the different factors involved in our students graduating, moving through the program, we've made some changes for class 2019, and I think that most of you are aware of this, but I'd like to reiterate the major changes, and if anyone would like to chime in with comments about this, please do. With the next class, which starts in February 26th, our residentials will be completely decoupled from our courses, and so they will be offered between terms instead of during a term, and they will be credit bearing in and of themselves, and students will have to pay extra for these residentials. That's one thing. We have 5 specializations now instead of the concentrations. Those are, you can see those on the website. I won't list these right now. And then instead of the practicum, we're moving completely to e-portfolios. So e-portfolios will be a large part of our curriculum. We were moving, of course, in that way with class 2017 with the use of Mahara, but now we'll be completely using the e-portfolio as the capstone kind of project that the practicum was with all previous classes. So that leads to my goal for the next class is to make our curriculum as high impact and engaging as possible in this new model. And I think we can do it. I think that's something Kelly is working on. I think that's something that we're all thinking about. And I've showed this book before, but I'd like to show it again. I don't know if you can see it because I can't see myself. Anyway, it talks about high impact e-portfolio process. And they talk about 3 aspects that we've talked about, but it's interesting that they talk about in this book. It's reflection, integration, and inquiry. These are the 3 aspects that they say are really important to high impact processes and engaging. And I'd like to add a 4th, and that's application, which is so important for our model. So just type reflection, integration, inquiry, and application. If we can show this in an online platform, I think we're doing great, and I think we can do that. To move on briefly to our status for students in class 2019. Again, Jody's done a good job with data for this. And this isn't looking so good right now. We have 11 admitted students. We have quite a few applications in progress and quite a few students who have inquired but haven't finished their application. And so that's one thing that we're going to discuss some more as we talk about the importance of recruitment going forward. Another thing, one thing just to close off what I'm doing, of our students who have inquired, 40 are from Africa. So it shows the continued importance of our African students. And one thing that I have done in the last couple of weeks is to reach out to our alumni who are African women, because they have been traditionally very strong students, and to see if we can start a discussion group to brainstorm ways of raising money for potentially for an African women's scholarship fund or even an endowment. And a few have responded already, and I think Dan's going to be on that. Maybe we can get Freyo involved, Dan Robinson, and see what we can do to try to raise money for African women. So with that, I'd like to proceed in the agenda. Let me find that to Dan. Dan, if you can talk about your recent work in Vietnam, because this also relates to class 2019 and our recruitment model.
Sure, thanks. I just got back Sunday and then flew here to North Mountain yesterday. My luggage was 35 pounds lighter coming home because I didn't have QCRs and view books in my baggage. So I was able to pack some Vietnamese coffee in all that empty space. What we're doing is so highly integrated in Vietnam with creating, with the Vietnamese in mind, a very pertinent specialization in linguistic development education. There are a lot of really important partners up and down the political and education food chain. So in 7 very intensive days of work in Vietnam, meetings with people from the Ministry and the Department of Education and Training, the People's Committee, principals and teachers in the high schools, research scientists with the Rockefeller 100 Resilient City Network project in Gan Ta, our very, very good local coordinating committee, librarians, it was just a constant movement of all of these different people at different levels who are going to be part of this. In a socialist republic, the politics are such that one works very intentionally with the government, and when things come together in a way that suits the government, it's pretty smooth sailing. So we have a lot of potential excellent teachers, recruits for the master's program. My quota for the February class is to work with the admissions committee on 8 strong candidates coming into the new class. We'll do it, and they're going to be good, and it may go down to the wire, because this is all dependent upon step-by-step working with the government. And it's just like getting a visa. The government's power is measured in the decreasing number of days to a deadline. Their power increases as we get closer to a deadline, and they damn well know that. So it's a negotiating posture. It's also a way of reminding you that our work in Vietnam is there by the grace of the government, and I never lose sight of that. Our key partner is Dr. Vatham Sun, and he is a very busy person, but he gave us 3 very full days in that very intensive week of his undivided time on this project. He is selling this project in Hanoi to the Ministry of Education. He is selling it in the different departments of education in all 11 provinces of the Delta. Meanwhile, he's Vietnam's representative on climate change. He is the lead scientist on both rice and sugar for a country that basically sells rice and sugar. So to have 3 of the days last week with Sun, and then we still had unfinished business as it was time for me to head back to Ho Chi Minh City. So he drove 5 hours with me in a car to drop me off at the airport, just so we could have more time talking about each part of this project. Yeah, I'm exhausted. And we've got really good partners. I couldn't ask for better people who are invested in it. These are largely people that I've worked with, my wife and I have worked with for now 28 years. There are also some newbies that are part of this project, really good aspiring young teachers, and there are our prime candidates for being in the master's program. So I look forward, next step, working with Naomi and with Kelly and all the faculty, just on getting this new specialization together.
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate that. Does anyone have questions for Dan about the Vietnam initiative or anything about his trip there?
Coming up next will be a workshop. That'll be at the end of January. And we're all working towards February 26th as the start date for engaging with Vietnamese teachers in the master's program. And alongside those that would be in the master's, it would be upwards of 200 other teachers that would be in a certificate program. The government wants 215 people starting a certificate program in February.
So the potential candidates for the master's program would be coming out of the workshop in January.
These are people already identified because we had a major workshop in July.
Okay.
And so with that cadre of 27, we're selecting the top 8. Dr. Sun, has proposed sort of a competition among the 27 to make sure that it's really the good 8 people who would be committed to the project over the long haul. They're not doing the masters for themselves. They're doing the masters for the Mekong Delta. And then the workshop in January enlarges the scope of this to, well, the People's Committee has said they want 100% of the teachers of Gan Tuc province involved. So we're scaling up from the first step.
And the government would pay for this?
It's a combination of funding from the government and simultaneously all the work we're doing with IEEE. So that's the external funder. It's sort of a catch-22 because the external funder wants to know that the Department of Education has signed off on it. And the Department of Education wants to know that the external funder is serious.
That's hard.
Same old. And we get pulled in both directions constantly. But this is the nature of the beast. I'm not surprised by any element of it at all, except that we literally have people from elementary schools to high schools, all the way to the Ministry of Education in Hanoi, in on the conversation right now.
Well, thanks, Dan. That's pretty exciting. Thanks.
It's very exciting. Dan, my only question on that would be, when you say down to the wire, are we thinking down to the listed January 5th admissions deadline wire, or might there be another backdoor date and a later unannounced admissions meeting in, say, mid-January? I mean, I think obviously we're flexible to both. I'm just curious.
So the deadline I give everybody, Luke, is January 5th.
Okay.
And the threat behind that deadline is I tell them, you know, Luke Taylor's going to be on your show. January 5th. And at the same time, you know for sure there's a backdoor deadline that's after January 5th.
Sure. Okay, just checking. But it's always good to know where we are and trying to count numbers. And
Absolutely. I hear you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dan. Daniel, could you report on what's happening with the World Scouts? Because you also had a trip there recently to Geneva, I think.
Geneva and also Kuala Lumpur. The organization's based in Kuala Lumpur, and I checked with them after the commencement ceremony, and then I was in Geneva to check on the funding. And this has been a 6-year negotiation. Dan has described how his has been 2.5, 3 decades. And so in this case, I've been trying to get the Scouts on board for quite some time. And it does look now as though we will have both money and applicants. But the big, and we've picked 4 pilot countries and maybe 6 pilot countries. Nawang is on this call. He's been working with the Bhutan and the Nepal Scout organizations. So Nepal and Bhutan are 2 of the national organizations that are involved. FREO is working with Uganda and Ethiopia and Burundi, probably, and actually Ruben is working with Uruguay. So we may be as high as 6 national organizations, but almost certainly with 4, we already have 2 letters of interest from those 2 from Nepal and from Ethiopia. The basic problem, though, that we're struggling with the Scouts, well, I guess there are 3 problems. The basic one was, where's the money coming from? And the office in Geneva has said that they're going to put up some money. Now, they haven't said it in writing, but I'm trusting John Gehagen, the president of the World Scouts Organization. He says, once you show your candidates, we'll find some money. So that is, we're going forward with that. The second big problem is, how do you keep these national scout organizations from picking their brothers-in-laws and really getting quality scout leaders? Because this is a scout leader training slot that we're talking about. Scouts, as I think everybody knows, is the 2nd largest NGO in the world. There are, at this point, 150 million active scouts around the world. The largest is Indonesia at 20 million scouts. Americans, relatively small, at 3 million. The problem is to get people who are actually going to be sincere workers and students in our master's degree. And so we've picked up an idea from Faculty College, which is to have students perform on a certificate. And then to the students who perform best in our certificate, they will have top score in coming into as the master's degree. That is an idea we've talked about now, and the thought is that we will pilot it and test it. Obviously, we'll have the other master's degree requirements as well. But there's been questions historically about, how much can you tell from the community statement, or how much can you tell from a person's transcript? So maybe this is another very powerful tool. And so there's been a lot of work in the last week in trying to design this certificate. And I'm working with Scott Lawson, who's a member of our faculty, who is a former Eagle Scout. I guess once not a former Eagle Scout, once an Eagle Scout, always an Eagle Scout. Scott and I are trying to put together a 15-day certificate. This leads into the same problem that Luke brought up for the Vietnam, which is when the certificate's not over by the January 5th deadline, the certificate is now designed, a 15-day certificate begins the 26th of December and gets over the 10th of January. So once again, we're looking at a problem in the admissions deadline, but we're not able to get the news out to these scout organizations to start to get students to apply. We're hopeful that we will have upwards of 50 students working on the certificate, and that we at this point believe that we have funding for 6. It depends on how much Geneva comes in and puts in, but 6 is a presumed number. Maybe it may be more that Geneva will come up with. So we have essentially a parallel case to the Vietnam, a partner that's bringing forward their own students, but being vetted in this case through a certificate, the way the Vietnam was vetted through a workshop. As with Vietnam, there's massive scaling up potential, but for this class, the number will be small just to start to see how to work with that partner.
Any questions for Daniel? Thanks a lot, Daniel. That really is exciting too, hearing what the progress after 6 years. Questions about Scouts?
I will say that one little thing, for all of us who are familiar with Scouts in America, Scouts internationally, first of all, they're older by about 5 years than the American mean age. We will be getting some women, but at first we may not, because they're in the process of sorting that out. That's country by country. The other thing is that Scouts internationally are not based on merit badges and tests. So I thought this would be a backdoor entry into competency-based education. Scouting internationally is mostly based on your community engagement. Scout troops are very active in community projects rather than individual projects, which is what American Scouting is pretty much based around. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds, because there could be synergies or there could be dysfunction. That's why it'd be useful to have a smaller class size at the beginning.
Do you have approximately a sense of what the max number of scouts they would be willing to pay for this go around would be? I'm similar to my question to Dan. I'm trying to count how many backdoor entries we might get after we've closed down official recruitment and admissions processes.
Well, I've told them we couldn't handle a group of more than 10, and they've talked about 6.
Okay.
And Dan, you're talking about leaders and Scout participants, right?
Not Scout. I'm talking about Scout leaders of the national organizations at this point, who will be understanding our idea of community-based change. Now, they may be senior Scout leaders, but there'll be people who have influence in these national organizations. They are also very interested in our certificate program, and for Scout leaders, that this might be a national program. The number one problem in World Scouts, they consider themselves an educational organization, is training their leaders globally. That is their central global challenge. And they've been frustrated that we aren't able to talk about large numbers. And I said that the certificate option, if we work at it, might be the way we get to large numbers rather than our master's degree option.
I have a question. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the recruitment. And so the scout, this funding for scouts is only for existing scout leaders. So it would somebody who already is in that system in those countries. Is that correct?
At this point, I mean, you know, we could perhaps use the office in Geneva. It wants to see the portrait of the candidates who are bringing forward. So if you have a scout leader in those countries, or even perhaps in another country, and said we wanted to join this program, we could go to this Irishman in Geneva, and whose name is John Gehagen, and say, you know, this is our roster. How many of these? How much money can you come up with? He's talking about something between $50,000 and $100,000 at this point as scholarship money, and that's where, you know, so that's. And Nepal and Bhutan and Ethiopia and Uganda are the 4 countries that we are most probable with, but Uganda and Burundi, I mean, Uruguay and Burundi may also throw in 1 or 2 candidates. Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to activate some people I know in Uganda and Kenya, and so I'm just kind of trying to figure out what I need to be talking to them about. So
connect with Freo. Freo is handling all those negotiations.
Okay.
So send him an email, and because just Nawang's on this call here, Nawang may want to make, I think Nawang's on, make some comments about the discussions he's had. Yeah, Nawang's on with Nepal. Nawang Bhai, do you want to make any comments about the Nepal commitment?
He was having some connectivity issues, he said in the chat, so. Oh, his mic's off.
Hello. Hello.
We can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you, Nawang. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. About the start now in Bhutan, their Lam, and we are communicating together, and she is going to discuss with the government level, because Bhutan, the scout is under the education department of Bhutan, so they are talking about on that. And Dr. Renan, we have sent already those outlines already. And Nepal, you know, we had, they have very interest on that, and they have given interest letter as well. But unfortunately, they have election is now government is going to change. So Dr. Renan knows very well when government was changed. So, so now this morning I had meeting about 2 hours with the scout office. And they said, yes, we try to select the candidates to the certificate. But now government is going to change, because the Maoist parliament is going to change now, and they're going to change all the board members. So they need to rethink about definitely their best, and they should do everything, but their management need to be changed. So the time. So that is, this morning we had discussion.
Thank you, Nawang. Thanks, Daniel. Any other quick questions? Otherwise, we need to move on to Luke. Okay, thanks a lot, Daniel, for your report. Luke, could you talk about your work in Tennessee, breaking ground in Tennessee?
Sure. So I'll talk a bit about it. I don't want to, without getting too hung up on every single thing I did, I also want to, based on that, kind of, as we talked about, move into also transition to this, you know, what can we each do, the ongoing steps and challenges of recruitment, and some broader reflections I have, very much prompted by the past couple weeks in Tennessee, but also that reinforced and reminded me of some valuable lessons learned through several years and multiple attempts at this so far. So I think, you know, as far as how to approach this, I've now done this. This is exactly the same way I approached making ground in West Virginia. which is to really just get one or two connections. In this case, my girlfriend happened to be very good friends with the head of community health programs for the Tennessee Clean Water Network. I'm really excited. She's actually been the only applicant that I got out of Tennessee. Her name's Kim Pettigrew, and she is very much a rising star in the Knoxville environmental nonprofit community. And so we'll be reviewing, I'm excited to review her application next week. But what's really important about that is that I originally kind of got Kim interested. I did not go to try to recruit Kim. In fact, I thought she already had a master's degree. I went just to say what's the lay of the land? Who should I be talking with? And I took her out to lunch, and she had a ton of questions about the program. And she literally came back and said, well, okay, this is what you guys are really offering. Me, as I see it, versus, and I'm currently being courted by a University of Tennessee PhD program, a DRPH program, and 2 different master's programs. She's now said we're the best looking one. And so I think that was really interesting. And also I'll come back to this at the end of the presentation. But she said, look, you guys are applied and you're flexible. And she goes back to being very much kind of the profile that we've talked about historically with students who are kind of punching above their weight level, doing a good job at it. She's also a full-time mom. Her significant other is a traveling musician, so only home half of the time. So the constraints, even things like showing up in person to a 1-week boot camp, she says, I can't do that. I have turned down 2 other distance programs because they still require me to show up on campus once a month or once a term. And so I think that's some interesting reflections I got out of that meeting with Kim, who then went on to put me in touch with a big host of people. And so that's the other thing I would say is every time you're kind of going for a possible target or recruitment, regardless or not of whether they're interested in the program, always get them to recommend a couple more names of people you might be able to follow up with. And because you get the spider plant effect. And so through Kim, I was able to make contact with the Community Action Agency of East Tennessee, the Unitarian Universalists, the Alliance for Better Nonprofits, the sustainability major and at the University of Tennessee, the Sustainability Working and Action Group at the University of Tennessee, and then also through our friends at AmeriCorps, we got in touch with Volunteer Tennessee. And so I followed up with all these different groups, and with the exception of, we'll see what happens with the statewide video conference I'm doing for all the AmeriCorps host sites statewide in Tennessee. And then also I'm following up with an ongoing relationship I've had with the Highlander Institute, which is a kind of the premier social justice training and action agency in the Mid-Atlantic Appalachian region and has been since the 1950s. People have basically told me no. And so, I'd like to have better results from that, and I'm going to follow up with a lot of it. And I think one thing that I've heard now from several groups, including my meetings yesterday at the university, were that it's, the timing's not right, having a funny start date, and also the basic idea of we're now less than a month from our admissions deadline. So it is too much and too often too much to expect, somebody to hear about this program, consider it, and decide to apply to do it with Christmas in the middle and New Year's. So I think that is something for us all to bear in mind, back to the greater topic of kind of where we're headed with the urgency of recruitment, because I see it very much as being the urgency of following up with established leads, noting the ones that maybe we should put in the docket for the class in the fall, and also being very realistic about lots and lots of media blitzing at this point is not going to get you new applicants. Follow up, reminding people who were thinking about applying, deadline is getting near. Those are the conversations that I'm still having. They're, gaining weight. And a lot of them now are either turning into real consideration to apply, or maybe I'm interested in the fall class. It's just too much to take on right now. And so I think it goes back to this point that we talked about many times in the past, is that, doing a cold call to a new organization is very hard. And, in the case of Kim, she's the only person I have ever sat down, told about our program, who self-nominated themselves. And I truly think that's because I walked in as being, and she's a longtime friend of my girlfriend, that there was some inherent trust there, and I didn't try to recruit her. And I think we have to be very realistic about what is a reasonable expectation to kind of hook someone and reel them in. And so I just put that out, especially when we're all juggling so many other priorities. And so I think one lesson that I was reminded of is the importance of getting on recruitment early instead of at the last minute, because at the last minute you're desperate. It's back to Dan's point about the closer we get to the deadline, the more negotiating room the applicant or the student has. I've got people coming back now and saying, well, I'm interested if you can start to tell me what kind of financial aid package I'll get. That's not an ideal situation for any recruiter to be in talking to students. So, another point that I will make is our recruitment for the class this fall needs to begin on January 6th of 2018. It's not something we put off till March. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. And back to that, I think it's really important to, be aggressive, but don't get annoying. Don't get redundant. I think it's really important that we don't wear out our welcome on listservs or social media accounts. People will stop following us. And so we need to come up with better ways of gauging real interest. I was thinking about, you're right, Christy, we have a ton of applicants in the system, kind of in process. But I followed up on the American ones about a week ago with Jody, and discovered that the majority of them haven't logged in since June. That tells me that they're probably not interested, and they're also not responding to emails. So I need to look them all up. Maybe get in touch with, some of these types of points. The other interesting things that have come out of my failed attempts in Tennessee, one is I was really interested to talk to he's a 30-year tenured faculty member at the University of Tennessee. He's a department chair, and he started the sustainability major at the university. He talks to over 30 recruiters a year. He said, at the end of the day, we have about the most interesting program that's come into his office in a long time. But it's going to take a long time to get off the ground, specifically because students are not interested, by and large, in the young millennial students I'm speaking of, are not interested in the deeper qualitative arguments we give about our degree. This guy cut me off and said, look, to sell your program, I need to know the following 4 things. First and foremost, how much money will it cost? How much time will it cost? And what kinds of jobs will this prepare them for? And he told me outright, he said, I know now, I advise dozens of students, if I don't give a satisfactory answer to those 3 points, it's useless for me to talk anymore about the program. So I think and he told me outright that he thinks our degree is overpriced at a $24,000 mark. So I know that most people don't pay that. And while it's not up for dispute, his only point was you're in a competitive space and you're competing with the online programs and the stereotypes that come with that. So I think those are just some other reflections I've heard. And then most interestingly was through my connection at the Community Action Agency of Knoxville, which also runs all the AmeriCorps services for East Tennessee. So potentially we thought we were targeting 58 AmeriCorps state members and an additional 40 vistas. To a doodle poll, out of that catchment number, only 2 said they would be interested in hearing about our program. And then they stepped back from that commitment and said they're no longer interested either. And So instead of just leaving it there, I had Jason follow up with them. And some of them came forward and gave us very clear feedback on why they're not interested. And while their reasons were mainly semantics, we have to keep those semantics in mind. First and foremost, they don't think our name of our university sounds like a real university. And if that was a concern for them, they're sure that an employer would have it. And that by and large was why most of the millennial AmeriCorps in Knoxville have said they're not interested in our program, our name. And then we further add what the degree is in, and it's not clear. And so we can't do anything about that. We can't change that. But we have to be realistic about that when we send out a news ad or we promote a post in a magazine. Most people look at that and probably assume we're not accredited. And they don't know that a .edu means that. And this is just something we're going to struggle with. And I think it goes back to the points of trust and the importance of that. And so I think it's also really important, and this comes back to my point about recruitment beginning on January 6th. There's two types of recruitment, and I think Dan Wessner is the person who originally made this distinction. There is attracting new students, and there is also retaining the students and relationships that we already have in place. And I think that is, as much as we need to be doing a really good PR campaign starting in February to begin getting new students and new people in the door, we've got to be really careful that we're not losing students, that the students who apply actually enroll, and that the students, once they're in our program, have an awesome time and go out and really recruit for us. And I think we have got to be, it comes back to, I've got some other points that I would like to, that I just put down as I was making all the notes for this short presentation, such as how can we effectively use alumni in the future?
Excuse me. I think we need to kind of wrap it up and give some people a chance to discuss and maybe 10 minutes for discussion. So you want to wrap up?
Well, let me just close on exactly that point, which is what are reasonable expectations if we're asking family, friends, colleagues to recruit for us? What do we need to equip them with? And what are the points that we need highlighted to kind of carry this beast forward, because we're all in it together.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Luke. You have some important, sobering points, I think, that have come from your experience. And so I'd like to hear from Daniel. Are you listening to this? Daniel and Dan, people that have been involved in recruitment, if you have comments or with regard to what Lucas said or additional feedback.
Well, this is Daniel, and I have been listening to Luke's comments. What Luke describes is where we need to get to. We know why we're at the place we're at right now. But I have no disagreement with where we have to get to. We've addressed some of the key problems in the last couple of years that we had that were a function of notice. Let's start on January 6th. We're obviously not going to change our name. That is, I think it may be a problem in some ways, but behind the issue of a name, I think, is the issue of we have to establish it as a brand and have people know us for what we are. The name Future Generations came because we started out as an NGO. Now we're a university. So, I appreciate Luke's comments. What they're based on more than anything else is evidence and experience. Many of us have talked for quite some time based on our opinions and our thoughts and our hopes. I think Luke has he's worked harder at admissions recruitment than anybody else that we've had in the institution. He spent years at this now, and he's had hundreds of meetings, and so we have to take his comments as evidence, not just as another faculty member's opinions.
Well, to that point, just, yes, we're not going to change the name, but I think it's really important when we think that a classic function of advertising is just to get your name out there. Well, just getting our name out there isn't enough. And I think that's the point. We need the brand, we need relationships, we need networks that speak for us on behalf of us.
So I can weigh in on a couple of the comments. First of all, my experience is the typical length of time that a North American grad student, prospective grad student, thinks about entering a program is at least 2 years. And I mean, I weighed entering my seminary degree for that length of time. I weighed entering a PhD program for longer than that length of time. And when we're speaking of North American students, particularly individuals, that's their reality. That's their expectation, that we would understand that they're that serious a candidate. So when we come at them in a rush, then they're suspicious of our intent to recruit them so fast. We have a very different track of recruitment, and that's through partnerships. So Daniel's discussion of Scouts, mine of Vietnam, what Luke has done with AmeriCorps, what we have with the Coverdell Fellows and the potential with Peace Corps. These partnerships are a different approach for building our university, filling our cohorts, creating the ongoing relationship that we want with international organizations that support community growth. So I'm not dissuaded by poor results from individual recruitment because we're making progress on partnerships. And we will find the balance of those two different approaches at some point. We haven't found that balance yet. January 6th is too late a start date for filling the next cohort. I've been actively writing to people principally about the cohort that would begin in the fall, not the one that begins in February. I'm not dismissive of the dates for February. I'm very serious about that, and that's why I flew to Vietnam for a very intensive week, is to fill out February. But I was also speaking with them about recruitment for August, and I was speaking with them about recruitment of August 2019 as well. And we even broached the subject of how the Ministry of Education would be paying for candidates after the fall of 2019. So that's part of partnership, is long-range planning. I do think Future Generations University is a funky name. And we have a funky MA in Applied Community Change. And we have some funky specializations with a funky name of a funky organization. That said, I think there is some branding to go with the funkiness. And if we can prove the seriousness with which we do the research that leads to the learning, that leads to the action, that leads to the continuity, then we have a brand and we have a product that universities don't have. And I've taught for 25 years on university campuses, and I'm not impressed with the marketing schemes that they have. It's not something that wakes you up at 2 in the morning and says, this is how I want to live the rest of my life. We don't want to go that path. We don't want to go the path of trying to have the best student center and to have the coolest natatorium and to have organic meal plans and to have all the things that might impress a North American student. Our research, our learning, our action are the basis of our branding. And if it means we have 90%, 95% students from other countries outside of North America, then that's going to be part of our distinctive nature. Last thing I'll say, I would not give up on the ads. In marketing, if you haven't said it 10,000 times, you haven't said it yet. And our ads have just started. So if we're serious about trying to recruit people of the Zoomer boomers who might be reading Sojourners, yeah, we can keep refining it and get a sharper ad, but until we've had our name constantly in front of that readership for a number of months or a year, I don't think they've seen our name yet. And that's the reality. We live in an over-branded planet. So I wouldn't give up on it. I would keep examining it, and I would look at the results, but I would give it more time.
Thank you, Dan. Any other final
Yeah.
responses or comments?
Very quick question. You were there, you were in Tennessee, you were at Highlanders. You're kind of stepping into Skip Bevins territory there. I see that Skip Bevins is offering a study tour to India in January. Did you run into any did you get any kind of feeling that there's conflict there, or from people you're talking with in Tennessee?
Skip's name has come up once in the past because at Highlander, because they remembered that Future Generations had once brought a group of students there through Skip. I don't, it's not clear to me. I've seen Skip once or twice at conferences. I'm really not clear what he's doing or where he's at. But no, I've actually been surprised given how much, in 2 or 3 cases, I've run into him and people know him. But by and large, I think he's just kind of moved on. And interestingly enough, my last conversation with Skip said that he couldn't figure out a way to pay the bills working in region and was going back overseas. So,
Okay.
but no, I don't see a conflict of interest with that. I do, however, think we have a conflict of interest on our social media pages at times when we are trying to simultaneously blitz recruit for a certificate at the same time as we're blitzing for social media. Same way that, this is what I meant when I said, how do we use our alumni? Do we want our alumni to go and sell the experience they had at Gandhi to their friends as a standalone, or do we want them to go find us one good candidate for a slightly different program? You can't ask them to do both. And when we ask people to do this stuff, we got to give them a script. We have to give them a very clear script. And so I think that is a danger. And that's part of what I mean when we say January. As far as I'm concerned, it means having candidates coming in for the MA program have hooked them by June. And so we have to be very careful then about, say, offering a Grow the Change certificate or even maple syrup certificate when the lines may intersect. And so if I'm getting 3 or 4 requests to help recruit from Future Generations, and I get those requests, I'm not kidding. If I didn't know exactly what was going on behind the curtain right now, I'd be so confused about whether or not I was supposed to be helping recruit for Gandhi or for the next MA program. What is the MA program? When's it happen? How do residentials fit in? Because he told me they're gone. Now people are going back to Gandhi's ashram. And I'm just speaking from the standpoint of an alum, let alone, our friends and partners who are even more removed from our work and experience.
I think that this brings up the importance of having conversations. I think when it's the difference between a blitz, like a social media blitz, and a conversation. If you're having a conversation with someone, you can say, we have a few opportunities, which might you be interested in? We have certificates, we have a master's program that starts in February, and we have a master's program that starts in August. So I think it's normal to present different options and possibilities, but it makes it hard if we're just relying on these blitzes and not a good conversation or good discussion, whether it's with our alumni or connections with alumni or our partners. I think basically what we need to be doing is always thinking about recruitment and always thinking about partnerships, because we've kind of gotten into this mode of a class starts every 2 years, and so it's only maybe the 9 months before the deadline date that we start thinking about recruitment. So I think it kind of needs to be a mentality or a paradigm shift for us that we're always thinking about recruitments, whether recruitment from a communications perspective or a development fundraising perspective, whatever it is.
I would I second that, Christy, and this is so fundamental to the university. I'll put the plug in for a full-time person whose only charge is that near, medium, and long-term vision of the recruitment cycle. The other thing that would make this a very funky institution is here's a university without a full-time recruitment officer. We need that. We need that. And it's near and it's medium and it's long-term, but in particular, it's medium and long-term. Mm-hmm. Because this is graduate work. It's great for a university to have multiple entry points, and I fully support our multiple entry points. But we can't overburden the system by asking the same people, as Luke was pointing out, to be considering all the different entry points. While we have those different entry points, we need to very carefully be targeting certain populations with particular entry points, not letting them know about all of them.
Good. Well, thank you guys for that really good discussion. We have one more thing on the agenda, and that's Jesse. Jesse, are you on at your dad's now?
I am. Yeah. Hi. So, can you hear me?
Yeah. So could you talk about assessment briefly?
I could also, seeing as we're running over, I could give everyone an update at the staff meeting as well. I don't know. Does it make sense for me to hold off until the staff meeting?
I think maybe a couple things like a report on the personality pad might be more better for the faculty. So you could possibly talk about with the faculty things that won't be as appropriate or relevant for the staff meeting.
Okay. Yeah. I'll keep this brief. So I'm just in the middle of putting together the Term 4 assessment report. This is a much more comprehensive process than in the past 3 terms, because now I'm looking at longitudinal data over the course of class of 2017. So we're looking to see what kind of patterns we can identify in the data in terms of student performance, student feedback, faculty performance, the direct assessment process. You know, are we hitting our marks in terms of teaching the learning outcomes to the degree that we are purporting to? So right now, Dad and Michelle are in the process of doing the direct assessment of the student work samples from the Term 4 courses. Had a bit of a tough time getting the Term 4 faculty, who were mostly part-time faculty, to submit student work samples. One faculty member just ignored me until I finally gave up. And a couple others sent smaller samples, which are okay. We can use small samples and still get scores. But overall, you know, I think we're in a place where we can still have meaningful scores and meaningful data for Term 4. So I think we're in okay shape there. So I'm really looking forward to, in the first month or 2 of the new year, really spending a bunch of time putting together all of these data points that we have for the last 4 terms, and putting something together that's compelling for new students, for new faculty, for existing staff, and also for the HLC in the fall. I've been working with Dad on the assessment part of the HLC report as well, on the comprehensive report, and all of this is going to fit right into that. So the other thing I'll say is the personality pad. So basically our faculty peer review project is underway. We have the 11 full-time faculty members participating. The idea here is for us to pilot a peer review process to see if we find it useful, and if we think it might be useful down the line for faculty and staff, and also for our students. I think most specifically for our students to be doing some kind of peer review process to assess their group work and their other sort of communal activities as students at Future Generations. And then the last thing I'll say is that I'm really working to expand assessment via impact analysis for the class of 2019, and this is basically through the PLA. The portfolio-based assessment process, and having students do their own impact assessment at the beginning of the term, at term 1 at matriculation, and then again at the end. If anybody is interested in impact assessment and wants to I'm at the point now where I'm looking for people to jump on board here and start start working out a specific plan, please let me know. I think this is really the last remaining piece to our assessment plan that we've had for the last 4 years to really round it out. So with that, I'll close that out. And there's some
Jesse, can you elaborate on that a little bit? What exactly it would be and what exactly you're looking for from people?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So we've been looking for the right way to do some community impact assessment, right? And it's a tricky thing to unpack. How do we determine what impact our students are having in their communities? And my take on this is that because we have working professionals who most of them have jobs, they have already had some impact, they have connections in their community, is when they learn to use the ePortfolio system at the beginning of term 1, that among the very first things we have them do is follow sort of a best practices, step-by-step process of doing their own community impact assessment. Where am I right now in my community? What kind of impact have I had and am I having through my job and through my other community-based initiatives? That is one of the first entries in their ePortfolio. And then one of the very last entries in their ePortfolio before they graduate is for them to basically redo that process. And for them to say, okay, what impact am I having now after 2 years in Future Generations University? Of course, going to the community members, getting feedback from the community, there's a lot of best practices we can bring in. And then, of course, for us to basically subtract T1 from T2 to come up with some decent generalization of the impact that Future Generations is having.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Any other the final questions for Jesse about the assessment efforts? I'd like to add something to that, which kind of goes along with your difficulty on getting direct assessment artifacts from Term 4 faculty. I've been working at kind of faculty debrief conversations with Term 4 faculty, and I'm having some mixed results. Pretty good luck though in getting a hold of them and having good conversations with them. I think it's a little harder with the adjunct faculty than of course with you guys, our full-time faculty. So, but I think it's an important effort to be able to debrief the Term 4 classes and look for things especially that we can improve and that can be improved on the classes as the courses as they move forward.
Well, let me just add, that this was the only student survey that was taken after graduation, basically, when the students had no reason to, even though these were anonymous, to feel like they had to inflate their ratings. And the faculty evaluations were uniformly high. I mean, there was a few, dings here and there, but it really seems like the students enjoyed the program and they enjoyed the faculty. So, there's that. From the student
another thing that we did with this class was to have electives.
Yeah.
And in Term 4, specifically Term 3 and Term 4, we had a few electives, so students had the chance to choose what they wanted to take. Other final comments or questions before we close off and give you guys a little bit of a break before the staff meeting? Thanks, Jesse, for that report, by the way. No question. Okay, well, thank you guys very much for coming out. Great to have this participation. And our faculty meetings we schedule every 2 months. So I'll be scheduling another one in 2 months. All right. Thanks very much. See you in about 15 minutes. Bye-bye.